Hey everybody, this is Kit from Kit's Cars. So I started a YouTube channel just so I could talk about cars because if I could do anything all day, it's talk about cars with people who like cars. But you're probably wondering what the heck gives me the credibility to talk about different cars. Well, I've owned 81 different cars, and I'm going to go through a brief history of all 81 cars. You can see where I've come from and hopefully where I'm going. So when I was in high school, my folks bought a Peugeot 505 for me to drive, and it was a horrible car. It drove great. It had 92 horsepower, was a three-speed automatic, and was just a terrible car. It had very little power. It had a horrible electrical system. The motor fell out of it, and yeah, it was terrible. But it got me to high school. It was great. So appreciative of that. Then I'm missing a picture of the 1985 Camry I inherited from my grandparents. That served as a trusty steed while I was finishing out high school and coming home from college. I finally convinced my folks to help me buy a car. My Mazda RX-7 was the first car that I chose myself. It had over 100,000 miles on it when I bought it, and it chewed through at least one motor during my after I got it, and then shortly after we replaced that motor, it died again. Unfortunately, after I sold it to a friend of mine who I feel very bad for. That car was so much fun, but yeah, it was not the most reliable thing in the world. I was not into modifying cars for performance at that point, but I did put a huge stereo in it. And as you can imagine, in a small hatchback, the having two 12-inch subwoofers directly behind my head, or in the later stages when I had three JL Audio 10W6s directly behind my head, boy, was that a that was an exciting ride. When I sold that, I bought a slightly more sensible car, which was a Nissan Nx2000, and the Nx2000 was great. It was how I got introduced to people that I know today as part of the SER club, and I had a lot of fun. I learned to autocross in that car. I took it to the track for the first time. I got 138 mile an hour and a 65 ticket in that, and yeah, what a great car. After I graduated from college and moved to Sunnyvale, I ended up leasing a 99 Mazda Miata. I had been driving a friend of mine's 94 Miata in autocross and just fell in love with the car. So I had to have my own. I bought a 99 Miata fully loaded with a leather package. And I got so put together by the dealer. It was the worst lease ever. I was paying way more than if I had bought the car, and mistakes were made. But I was at the young, gullible, about to meet up with some friends, and at the dealership, and they offered to buy my NX2000 for nothing and roll the balance into the lease of the Miata. And yeah, it was terrible all around. But I got my Miata, and when I discovered that I didn't fit with the top up, that made me sad. So I had the Miata about a year, and then decided to get into something that already had a turbo in it. So I bought a '97 Mitsubishi Eclipse. Man, that car was fun. I bought a whole bunch of parts for it before I even got the car. I was shopping around, and finally was pot committed because I had all these parts for it, and found one locally and traded the Miata in for it. Didn't get burned nearly as badly on this one, but still wasn't super pretty. The Eclipse was fun. This picture actually of the Eclipse was from a rallycross. We took the cars to a dry lake bed and ran around a rallycross track. It was turbo all-wheel drive. My dreams of becoming a car driver were true. I had a huge turbo on it and burnt the clutch out a couple of times. Great car. But the Mitsubishi dealership that I serviced my car in actually got in a brand new model year 2000 Honda S2000 in November of '99, and I had to have one. So traded in the Eclipse Bought one of the first S2000s ever to hit our shores, and loved that car. Took it to the track several times, had SSR wheels on it, and discovered that pulling the airbox lid off made a whole bunch of cool noise, and actually lost a whole bunch of power on the track because it'd suck in hot air from the intake. Anyway, that car was a lot of fun too. Really enjoyed it until I broke the transmission and the rear differential, and then I gave up and decided to buy something nice and reliable, like a 45,000 mile old E36 M3. The E36 M3 is my longest tenured car. I owned it for 1,278 days, and I only know this because I keep a spreadsheet of all the cars that I've owned, including the dates of purchase, the gearbox, transmissions, all that fun stuff. But the E36 M3 was a great car. I tracked it a ton. I probably went to track days at least 2 out of the 4 weekends. So I was usually doing between 2 and 4 days on track every month. I burned through so many sets of tires in that car, wheels, brakes. I had big brakes. At one point, I had a Dynon supercharger on it. It made over 300 horsepower at the rear wheels. I was super proud of that, and then got it on track and realized that a non-intercooled supercharger just didn't work very well on the racetrack. The car basically had stock power after a couple of laps. So I built up an aftercooler and all this fun stuff, and then I started breaking parts. I broke the rear differential. I broke the drive shaft. I broke the half shafts. I broke the diff mount. I broke the front subframe. I broke the rear subframe. Broke the rear shock mounts. Yeah, I think if you can break it on an E36, I did. One fateful day, that car finally got keyed. I had apparently made somebody mad. That car got keyed, and I got it sanded down to primer, or actually sanded down to metal, and completely repainted by a reputable body shop around here. They put more money into painting the car than the car was worth. So I decided it was a good time to sell it. But in the meantime, while I owned the E36, there were several sort of temporary ownerships. I took care of a late friend's 97 Eagle Talon, similar architecture to my Eclipse, with an even sillier looking wing. I also took care of a 93 Nx2000 that was intended to be a track car. That car was really fun to take to the track. I finally sold the E36 M3 to a friend of mine, and I bought a 2004 S2000. Well, I thought I'd give the S2000 another shot after they gave it a bigger motor and it dynoed better. I put all sorts of fun track mods on it, owned this car for over a year, and ran it around the track a whole bunch of times. As you can see, that had some cool carbon fiber bits and a big wing, and JRZ shocks and big brakes. And yeah, that car was great. I had a really good time with it. But the S2000 was too small. So I began to buy a bunch of shit boxes as daily drivers. I had a 90 525i, really nice car on the highway. Man, it just ate through the front suspension bushings, and had all sorts of other interesting electrical issues, as you might expect for an E34 with over 200,000 miles on it. I sold that car for a nice, reliable Infiniti 93 Infiniti G20. When I had it, it had these awful steel wheels on it, but what a great little car. The G20 had the popular SR20DE 4-cylinder motor. It was torquey and made good power. It was a light, great handling car with a multi-link suspension up front. That was a great car. And then I got silly. I sold the G20 and bought a 94 Supra twin turbo as a daily driver off my boss at work. It was also a fantastic car that was fun to drive, but I just didn't fit. Most Japanese cars I discovered were just not sized for a guy proportioned like me, and I ended up selling the car for a small profit. That's one of the cars I definitely wish I'd held on to longer, because they became super valuable as time went on after the Fast and the Furious. But I sold my Super Twin Turbo after a couple of months of buying it. I bought a Mazda RX-8 to replace it, and man, the RX-8 was a bit of a travesty. It was a great handling car. It worked really well around on the street. It was fun at autocross, but it managed to get about 11 miles to the gallon when I was driving it normally. And if I drove really nice and shifted it low, I think below 3,000 RPM for an entire tank of gas, I got 13 miles to the gallon. And the other problem with that car is it had no power below, say, 4,500 RPM. A good friend of mine challenged me to race a four-cylinder Camry from a stoplight, shifting at 4,000 RPM, and I couldn't get past the Camry. So the RX-8 had to go. Mazda ended up buying it back. I had leased. It was one of the first good lease deals I got. I think I was paying less than $300 a month for it, and Mazda had given me such a discount on the car that when I went to sell it a few weeks later, the Subaru dealer that I traded it in on gave me enough for it to get out of it, which was more than I owed. Worked out great. I had a 2005 Legacy GT, and I really bought this car because I had just met the woman who would become my wife, and she liked to go to Tahoe, and I didn't have a car that could go to Tahoe, so bought one. The 05 Legacy GT was a great car. It was the first year of the 2.5 liter turbo motor, so it had 250 horsepower. It had enough space and heated seats, and we took it to Tahoe a whole bunch of. I put a ton of miles on it in the roughly 5 months that I owned that car, and then turned it back in and sold it back to Subaru to buy my 2005 E46 M3. I really wanted to get back into BMWs. I had driven E46 M3s and been jealous of the fact that you could rev them to 8,000 RPM when my poor little E36 would run out of breath at 6,500 RPM. And the amazing differential it had made driving really fun. I was really excited to get that car and really enjoyed it. I ended up tracking it a ton also. I think in 2005, I was at the peak of my track career. I was able to get my M3 around Thunder Hill East, for those of you familiar, in 2 minutes and 2 seconds, which is not fantastic, but pretty good for the time, I guess. Thanks to a set of Moton Club Sport shocks, 18 by 10 square tires, and a bunch of weight reduction. The M3 was sold for a 2006 Evo MR. At some point, I'd convinced myself that getting a cheaper car was the right thing to do, and really liked the Evo. The Evo had at the time, the twitchiest and fastest steering of any car I'd ever driven. It had Recaro seats and was really a $15,000 Econo box with $15,000 worth of really cool rally car parts on it. Brought me back to my DSM days, where really enjoyed having the 4-cylinder turbo with all sorts of fun parts on it. I taught myself to tune on that car too. I bought an ECU tech license and opened up the ECU and tried to convince myself I was a great tuner, and then I ended up taking it somewhere and getting them to tune it, because it turns out I'm not very good at tuning. Don't have a sensitive butt. So after, and I think I ended up buying my 06 S2000. And man, I loved that car. So it was white S2000. This is another Japanese car. It's one of the few Japanese cars I fit in, but I didn't fit in the car stock. I actually had to buy a backyard special seat lowering rail to give myself enough headroom in the car. And I ended up selling. I bought my 06 S2000 and kept it for about 3 months, and then I heard about the M Roadster. So BMW had built built an M Roadster prior, during when the E46 M3 was current, but this new generation of the 2006 BMW M Roadster had the E46 M3 motor, but didn't have the subframe issues that were going to cause the car to fall apart. At least I did think it did. And yeah, I ended up buying an '06 M Roadster. Really liked that car. We kept that car for a while. It was one of the few roadsters that I could sit in and fit in and comfortably. And I had a set of KW V3s on that. It was about the only suspension I could possibly get. And I used to run it around the track all the time. It was a pretty fun car. And in order, since the M Roadster was a two-seater, I ended up buying an '08, my first '08 GTI. Man, I really liked GTIs. That car was really fun. It was a stupid cheap lease. I think I was paying $200 a month for that car. It was a manual, and yeah, the GTI was fun. Eventually, as I decided that I wanted to consolidate. Didn't need two cars. Thought I could get all the fun I needed out of one car. So I sold both the M Roadster and the GTI and bought an '08 335i. The 335 at the time was super exciting because the N54 motor was practically infinitely tunable. I went and had a juice box on it and made a ton of power out of it. And then I switched to a Proceed and several other iterations of various tuning bits, downpipes, and made all sorts of power. And then I got bit by the Porsche bug. I bought my first Porsche, which was a 2003 911 C2 Cabrio. We had kids, or a kid by this time. You can see the car seat in the 911. Really liked that car. The 911 was a great blend of fun and just a really nice driving car. Really started my passion for Porsches, even though it might have been possibly the worst possible Porsche for me to buy. Turns out when I took the car to Porsche, the service history had indicated it was on not its second but its third motor, because the 996s and that the M96 motor was famous for lunching itself with killing the intermediate shaft bearing, which basically took out the motor if you didn't catch it in time. And this poor car had it happen twice in its 49,000 miles by the time I got it. But I had a great stereo. It was one of the first cars I put a stereo in a long time. Had Focal Utopias up front, and we built a small subwoofer box in the footwell, and that was a fantastic car to have alongside my 335. Well, then I heard about the Evo X. The Evo X came out. I'm missing a picture of my 2008 WRX. So I had a brief period where I thought we were going to get back into skiing, so I bought a WRX. We took it snowboarding once and then sold it back because the WRX handled like crap compared to the Evo. So I bought a 2008 Evo GSR, 5-speed. That car was interesting. It had a lot of compromises. Being a 5-speed, it turned about 4,000 RPM at normal highway speeds. It had a non-telescoping wheel. My 2006 Evo MR, the Evo 9, had a really nice small wheel that came way out from the dash, so there was no problem reaching it. For some reason, in the '08 Evo GSR, they also didn't have a telescoping wheel, but instead of putting it nice and close to you, they put it as far away from possible. So I ended up having to drive straight arm like this, which I hated. So I ended up buying a custom wheel for that car, and then I got annoyed that I had a custom wheel for it, so I sold it. I think I kept that car. I actually kept the Evo a little over a year, and then I bought a 2000. Oh, I bought my 335 and a Fit at basically the same time. And I thought that what I'd do is buy a comfortable daily that worked out well, that was automatic and kind of boring, that I could bake a little bit faster, and then have my Fit as another daily, I guess. The 335, I ended up realizing that I did not like driving a automatic, which was at the time a standard 6-speed torque converter automatic. Gave that car to my wife, and bought another S2000. I found an '08 S2000 at a dealership and fell back in love. This was my fifth S2000. I missed pictures of a 2002 S2000 I had very briefly before, but The '08 S2000 was the pinnacle of S2000 technology. They had put contrast stitching in it. They had softened the suspension such that it was easier to catch but improved the damping. The differential and transmission was further refined, and the car was great. I loved my '08 S2000, and had it for quite some time. And then I got a hankering to get back into a BMW. So when the new hardtop convertible Z4 S-Drive 3.5i, which was the terrible way to name cars, BMW, came out, I ordered one, and bought it when it came to the dealership, and found out we were having a second kid. So the Z4 lasted all of 14 days, at least transferred it to a coworker of mine, and went out and bought what made total sense, was a 2006 M5. So this brings us to about 2010. The '06 M5 was a great car. It was big, fast, comfortable. One of the funny things that happened with the '06 M5 was I bought a MagnaFlow exhaust, and MagnaFlow says measure 3 inches past this point and cut. So I did. Got into the car with my Sawzall and my driveway and went, cut the exhaust off, mounted the MagnaFlow up, and it was about 6 inches too short. So I had to drive it over to TC Designs at the time, and have him weld in some additional exhaust piping so I could connect my exhaust. But man, that was a fun drive getting over there. The M5 V10 revved to 8,500 RPM, sounded incredible, and having no exhaust on it made it sound even better. It's like driving an F1 car over there. That V10 engine is definitely something I won't forget. But the problem with that car is it brought me back to, well, there are two problems with that car. Number one is that it got terrible gas mileage. I knew it was going to get terrible gas mileage going in, so that really wasn't a problem. What was a problem was the fact that it had a tiny gas tank. It had, I think it was a 15 or 16 gallon gas tank, but the fuel light would come on at about 11 or 12 gallons consumed, which meant that at 11 miles to the gallon, normally I would get about 120 miles between fill-ups. Then otherwise I'd have to drive with the stupid gas light on, which bugged the crap out of me. So couldn't deal with that. And also the SMG3 transmission, despite being one of the best automated single clutch transmissions out there, felt like your passenger took a frying pan to the back of your head every time you shifted above 8,000 RPM. It was just brutal. The car would break its tires loose in second and third gear, which was lots of fun and fun to show off. But man, it was a little too violent for me. I had thus far avoided buying a E90 M3, thinking that the early M3s were soggy, torqueless monsters. I had the two 335s that were boosted and made probably double the foot-pounds of torque that the S65 made. Just didn't get it. So then I drove one. I drove one with the new the MDCT transmission and felt like an idiot because I'd been missing out so much. What a fantastic car. So I bought a 2011 E90 M3. You can see it in carbon black, or it wasn't carbon black, it was Jerez black then. It had and I put on competition wheels and another set of JRZs. Loved that car. I kept that car for over a year. It was my first double clutch transmission, first of many. Really enjoyed that car. The first thing I did, of course, was slap on a MagnaFlow exhaust because I loved it so much on my M5, and it was so loud. The problem is the S65. If you're not careful with the exhaust, they make an incredibly loud resonance and a drone between 2,000 and 3,000 RPM. And I ended up becoming known as the exhaust slut on E90 Post because I went through, I ended up owning a lot of M3s. And you'll see as we go through this that I owned, I think, 7. But I also went through almost 50 combinations of different exhaust parts. So I was always changing exhaust, and had several manufacturers send me exhaust just to try and make videos out of, because I was willing to slap them on and give a good review out of them. We really enjoyed that car. And while I owned my M3, I also bought a Lotus Elise. I bought a 2005 Lotus Elise. What a great car! Those are. It was super light. It was completely opposite the M3. Tiny little car. Really enjoyed the Lotus, except for the fact that it really didn't fit. With the soft top on and the bowed roof, I could just barely cram myself in there, but it was really hard to get out because of the top. I'd actually oftentimes roll, when I drove it to work, I'd detach the top and sort of roll it sideways so I could get my big old head out and then close the car up. And then I was driving the car, and I turned a corner, and the battery cracked itself out of the fiberglass, and pulled the battery cables off, and the motor died. And it was very confusing to me. And I opened up the trunk and realized what had happened. And it was pretty ugly. Luckily, mine was repairable instead of having to throw away the rear clam, which can oftentimes total a car. Really enjoyed, aside from that, enjoyed my Lotus, but then realized that I could consolidate the M3 and the Lotus into a single car, which was, so I actually ordered an E93 M3 convertible. I thought, this is going to be perfect. I'll get this big old single car that was convertible. Both kids fit in it. You can actually see that I have both of my toddlers in the back seat of it. And I had this grand plan of having this single car that could do everything. Well, it turned out that consolidating both cars didn't work out so well, because the E93 M3s are so heavy. Didn't really enjoy driving it that much, and it turns out the kids didn't really like being in a convertible either. So I sold that, at least transferred that car. I had put all sorts of parts on it, took the parts off, at least transferred it, and bought a 2009 Porsche 911. I remembered how much I liked my old 911, and I found I think about a 2-year-old 09 911 with the PDK transmission and the new direct injection 9A1 motor. Really liked that car. I kept it for a while, and then I bought another GTI, another great lease deal, $275 a month for a manual 4-door GTI. And that served me for a good amount of time. The GTI was fun. I ended up putting a tune on it that had a security mode so that it would only go up to 4,000 RPM, and you could only go 45 miles an hour in valet mode, which was great, except the time that I got onto the freeway and forgot that I had valet mode on and could only go 45 until I got off the freeway. Much laughter at my expense was had. After some time, I decided that I was going to consolidate back into one car. I bought a manual 2012 M3, and really enjoyed that car. I don't remember what brand of wheel this is, but it had a nice set of. I ended up prototyping a really nice set of wheels on this car, and enjoyed it for a while. And then I had that car about a year, and during that time I decided that I wanted a nicer daily driver as well. So I had my M3, and I bought a 2012 Hyundai Genesis. Oh, what a car. Big, huge luxury boat. I actually bought it because it was a dirt cheap lease. It was less than $300 a month. You can see my little guy standing behind it. I was proud to own a car of my people. Enjoyed that car. And then I found out a friend of mine was selling a 2007 Porsche 911 Turbo. And I had always wanted a Porsche Turbo. I mean, I remember my first exposure to the 911 Turbo was in a brief ride in a 930, and then a ride in a 996. And I bought my own 2007 911 Twin Turbo. Um, really enjoyed this car. I had a couple iterations of suspension on it, OZ wheels, a Europipe exhaust. I actually went through several exhausts on this car trying to find one that I liked. Turns out Porsches have the same problem that the E90 M3 has, that the exhaust drone if you're not careful. And the first couple of exhaust setups I had drone like crazy. I was really happy to find the Europipe, which was an all-in-one exhaust that looked factory, but didn't drone. It sounded really nice. I was really happy to buy one of those from Belgium. It came neatly packed in this cool box and slapped it on the car, and I really enjoyed that car. And I know that car inspired several of my friends to actually get 997 turbos as well, so was happy about its influence as well. When I ended up selling the Genesis for a 328i. I got again, I fell prey to a cheap lease deal on the 328 that I thought I would really enjoy, and turns out I'm not really a 328 kind of guy. I kept that car about 4 months and then lease traded it to a friend of mine, and then bought another M3. I sold the 911 Turbo after about a year and a half, and I bought a 2013 M3. It was the last year of the M3, so I figured I had to have one. Also really enjoyed this car. I bought my first set of Volk Racing wheels for this car, which are on the car here, and they rubbed like crazy. I couldn't find a set of tires that would make those work well, and didn't want to pull the fenders on a leased car. So I ended up selling that car after a few months, and the 991 had just come out. So I bought a 2013 991S. Man, what a great car. Really liked this car. It was light, it was agile, it was fun to drive. It had that lumpy 9A1 motor that made great power. And because it was one of the most expensive cars, probably the most expensive car I bought up until that point, I leased a 2014 Evo X GSR, and conveniently had forgotten about the Evo's problem that you drive like this with the steering wheel way the heck out there, which made it a really lousy track car. So I took off the airbag and bought this crazy steering wheel setup that pulled the wheel back to me, and it actually turned out to be the Evo X is a fantastic track car. It was really fun to drive. It was easy to drive. You could jump right in, turn good times, and I had it tuned. It was made a little over 300 horsepower at the wheels. Lots of fun. So got a desire to try something different, try something American. So I bought one of the first C7 Z51 Corvettes, and decided to pull the trigger on one. I flew down to San Diego, picked it up, drove it home, and I got it. It was, the break-in on that car was actually enforced by the ECU, so you couldn't actually rev it up very far until it hit 500 miles. And I actually hit 500 miles in the car on the way home from San Diego. And so as soon as I did, I stomped on it, and yeah, it was a great motor. It was fast, it was quick, and it was built terribly. I mean, I had come from Porsches and had gotten used to the refinement of the Porsche interior, and I just couldn't handle the American, the design of the American Corvette. And sadly to say, I let that car go. It was in such demand that I ended up selling it back to a Chevy dealer for what I paid for it, so it worked out okay. And I took my 997S in for service, and while I was in for service, the sales guy goes, "Hey, what if you want to drive a 991 convertible?" And I love convertibles. It was November, and this was late in 2013, and they were trying to get rid of some of the 991s that had left over, and somebody had ordered a manual, a 7-speed manual 2013 C4S convertible, and no one wanted a C4S convertible with a manual transmission. So I sold it to me. Ended up turning over my 991 coupe and got the 4S convertible for no money out of pocket. Drove home, explained to everybody that, hey, I painted and chopped the roof off. But yeah, I really enjoyed my manual cab. You can see I have the Porsche car seats in it. Didn't work very well as a daily driver, and I sold the Evo to a friend of mine, and ended up buying at least my first and only diesel car, which was a 2014 535 diesel. Really nice car. I had that car for about 5 or 6 months, and lease transferred it because I figured, why drive? I really wasn't driving that far. I was driving like 5 or 6 miles to work. So I figured I would get something that was a little more fun to daily, and I bought another M3. So I bought a 2011 E90 M3. This was one of the best M3 setups I had. These are Forge Line GA1R wheels. And I had the car with, I think it was it was JRZ. I think it was JRZ shocks. Anyhow, really enjoyed that car. It had big brakes, JRZ shocks. It was faster on the track. I took it to the track once, and then the F80 M3 came out, and I had to have one. Twin turbo, inline six. The F80 M3. I bought one of the first ones that arrived on the day that it was released, and I got it for MSRP, except for they threw in one of those protection packages. So I think I paid $1,000 for some carpet and leather protection, whatever. Really enjoyed the F80 M3. Got to prototype a bunch of parts on it, wheels and suspension. I think this was on KWV3s at the time. That really enjoyed my F80 experience, except for the fact that it sounded like the car, when you shifted it, sounded like it was very flatulent. It sounded like you'd eaten an entire 10-pack of Taco Bell bean burritos by yourselves and tried to get it out. Not a great sounding car. It didn't sound bad when you're actually accelerating, but it was really the shifts and the deceleration that didn't sound good. I ended up not taking that car to the track. Don't really remember why, but I decided to lease an FRS. They leased really cheap, and I figured I could take that to the track and supercharge it, and it'd be really fun. And it was. I remember I ran it around Laguna Seca a couple times and did a 149 in it on this horribly staggered wheel setup that I bought. I bought these wheels thinking I was going to supercharge the car, and bought massive rear wheels so I could keep the massive power I was going to make out of my FRS to the ground, and never ended up doing that. Lease transferred that, and I bought a 2014 Boxster S. Boxster S was great. That was such a fun car. It was PDK, so it had the flappy paddles, played all sorts of music, looked good, it was fun. But then I found out that Audi was going to kill the R8, so I bought one of the last manual V8 R8s. At the time, this was my first. This was really my first supercar. I'd never bought something that was really exotic like this. When I bought it, it had body color side blades, and I needed some contrast there, so I had the side blades wrapped in matte silver. I thought they looked really nice, and man, that car was fun. You don't see a lot of bright red R8s, and it's not a color you associate with them normally, but it actually worked really well on that car. Really liked that car. The R8 had a very interesting way of handling. It wasn't super lightweight. It certainly wasn't a tossable car, but it had just an invincible feel about the handling. You felt like you could turn the wheel forever and never lose grip. And truth be told, it was really hard. The downfall of that car was that it didn't have any of the fancy torque vectoring and the all-wheel drive system. It just it was what it was. It distributed power just the way it was going to. It made it so it was at least very, very predictable under throttle, but it did a lot more understeer than oversteer, unless you were really silly with it. Around this time, in 2015, I also helped with some friends organize a group buy of the 2015 Fiat 500e. We ended up selling, I think that group buy extended out to about 2,000 Fiat 500es. You'd heard me talk a lot about crazy cheap lease deals. Well, the Fiat was basically a free car after the rebates and everything. So we got a decent discount on them. They ended up being about $59 a month, which was almost free. And then you got a PG&E rebate that took care of most of that. And you got access to free rental cars. So for the 3-year lease, I could pick up the phone and reserve a rental car for free anywhere. Worked out really well because for every time we would go to Hawaii, we would use the Fiat rental program and have a car for us there. But yeah, Fiat was fun. This is one that I ended up passing on the Fiat to my wife, and I bought a 2014 BMW i3, my first carbon fiber body car, and kept the i3. Lease traded it to a friend of mine after 5 or 6 months, and did my consolidation thing again and bought a 2015 M4. The M4 was an interesting car. I decided that I missed having a manual, so I went and got a manual M4. I bought GRZ shocks for it again, and I bought really nice set of wheels. I thought this car actually looked really well, and finally found a set of wheels and a combination that fit that car and looked good without rubbing. Sold it to a good friend of mine, and I bought a Golf R. I decided that I didn't want to spend so much money on cars, so I bought a 2016 Golf R. It was going to be my only car, my track car, and my daily car. That was fun, and that didn't end up working out well. So I ended up buying. I briefly had a 2011 M3. This was a black DCT M3. It was also very pretty. Really liked that car. But I found a deal on a 2009 911 twin turbo cabriolet. Now the 2009 911 Turbo is a little bit of a special car because it was the last year of the Mezger engine. It had center lock. Mine had the center lock wheels, a beige full leather interior, basalt black exterior. I also bought a Europipe Stage 2 exhaust for that car, and it was great. Really liked that car. Probably should never have sold that, but the Boxster Spider came out. So Porsche finally decided to put the 911 motor into the Boxster and brought two of my favorite previous cars together. The Boxster Spider was awesome. I made a few mistakes in ordering. I didn't realize that you had to actually check a box to get auto-dimming rearview mirrors. So I had this nearly $100,000 sports car that I had to flip the little lever on the mirror every time someone got behind me. And I ended up having some transmission problems with that car. A lot of people did, and I sold it very quickly, but very much enjoyed it. I had headers and exhaust on that car. Yeah, it sounded great. It was probably one of the best cars I've owned on a back road. At the time, I also needed a daily, so I ended up leasing a BMW M235i. Boy, was that a mistake. Turns out that in the morning, I'm about 3/4 of an inch taller than I am in the evening. And I went and sat in this car in the evening, was like, okay, I guess I fit. And the next morning, I realized that I had made a horrible mistake. Lease transferred it to a friend of mine. And I bought a 2017 WRX STI as a daily. Yeah, that wasn't a great move. The STI lasted a little while, and then I sold it in a couple of months to buy an e-Golf. And I bought, this time we actually sold our house and we were in between houses. You can see I bought right after we this must have been right after or during the time that we were living in the apartment. I bought a 2016 M4, Like this wheel a lot. Help Signature Wheels get out there by running a set of their wheels on this car. Ended up lease training it when I realized that our we had some drama with our home loan, so ended up getting rid of that car. I bought and flipped a 2002 M3. This M3 was a friend of mine's and fairly low mileage. My first car I sold on Bring a Trailer. Then another friend of mine, ex-coworker, was selling his E93 M3 and thought, well, that'll work for some time. So I bought the M3 and then sold it to a friend of mine. After we closed on the house, I decided to buy a 2017 C4S. So Porsche had released the 997.2 with a new 9A2 3-liter twin turbo motor. The motor was actually really sweet. It was one of the least turbo-y feeling cars out there. I had a beautiful white C4S that I really enjoyed with the Sport PASM, and kept that car for a decent amount of time. That is car number 66. I bought a Chevy Bolt, also on a great lease deal. It was a $3,000 one-pay lease for 3 years, so we kept that car. And then I bought a 2015 911 Turbo S, and the Turbo S is a fantastic car. The biggest problem I had with my 997s were that the manual transmission in them was hard to shift fast, and what ended up happening was, unless you did a flat foot shift and dealt with that, the car would fall out of boost when you'd shift. So the PDK only 991 Turbo S was a great way to go. That car was super fast. Bought mine certified from Porsche dealership, and I really enjoyed my time with the Turbo S. At the same time, I had my Tesla Model 3 order finally came in, so I bought one of the first Model 3 rear-wheel drive long ranges. And then I sold the Turbo S and bought, when Audi released a rear-wheel drive V10 RWS, had to have one of those too. So I bought one of those. Didn't fall in love with the R8 RWS. It's a very big car. It was hard to slide around, and couldn't really see tracking it. So I sold that. Then I bought a 2014 Ferrari California 30. This was one of my favorite cars that I've owned. This had the handling speciality package, which gave it stiffer suspension and the sport exhaust. It was classic Ferrari colors, this dark silver over the Cuyo interior. Such a beautiful car. I mean, if you've never owned a Ferrari or never been in a Ferrari, there's a lot of things that Ferrari does to make the car feel special. One of the things I discovered, unfortunately, is that I don't fit in any of the mid-engine Ferraris comfortably. I can drive the convertibles if I never want to put the top up, but I always want to put the top up at some point. So the California was a bit of a compromise there. I could stick the kids in and haul them around if I wanted to, but it was still fun to drive, made all sorts of great noises, and was very close to an F430 that I fit in, except it weighed about 1,000 pounds more. I really liked my 2014 California 30, so I obviously thought that a California T with the 550 horsepower twin turbo V8 motor would be better. So when I found a Porsche dealership was trying to get rid of one, it was the very, very end of 2018, and I found the Porsche dealership next to me was trying to get rid of their 2017 California T. Beautiful car, white on black with full body clear on it. All sorts of interesting drama trying to buy that car. At the end of it, they couldn't understand my leasing company's deal. It was fast, and I have to admit I liked the original California better. The Ferrari had tried so hard to make the twin turbo V8 feel like a naturally aspirated motor, such that the power grew as you got closer to red line, that it severely limited the torque that the twin turbos would normally make in the lower gears. And I just never really got to the point where I bonded with this car. I ended up passing the Model 3 onto my wife, and I bought a Tesla. I bought a Model S P100D, which is up until now the fastest car in a straight line that I've ever owned. It was disgustingly fast, and really enjoyed having that car. But I ended up taking a new job that was too far away, and I was going to go over the lease. So I transferred the lease to a friend of mine and bought a Model 3 Performance, which actually turned out to be more fun to drive once you got over the fact that it wasn't nearly as fast. I sold the California T. I found a 2018, a manual 2018 GT3 at an Audi dealership where I had bought my R8. I sold them. One of the sales managers fell in love with my California T, paid me top dollar for it on a trade for the GT3, who actually it ended up being owned by a guy that was in one of our car clubs, who was a friend of mine's son's second grade teacher. Great car, really enjoyed it, the GT3. Went through a couple of exhausts on it. Really liked that car, and only sold it because I was able to get a 2020 McLaren 600 LT convertible. This was, aside from the R8s, this was the most exotic car I've owned. 600 LT ownership really felt like a privilege. This car was fantastic. It was fast. It sounded good once you revved it out. It has some of the best steering of any car I've owned, and it really felt like a truly exotic car. Most people didn't know what it was, and it's an amazing looking car to me. Not everybody likes the McLaren looks, but I think the 600 LT looks the best out of them. It has the super aggressive arrow all over it. It has a wing to sort of balance out the shape, and the flying buttresses that stay up when the top is down. Really enjoyed that car. I ended up, this is out of order, but I bought I missed going to the track. I hadn't been to the track in several cars, so I bought a BMW M2, which was great fun. Took it to the track, put on some MCS shocks on it, and made the mistake of driving a friend of mine's GT3 at Thunderhill. Realized that I was being silly trying to track this BMW, so I at least transferred it. I got an M8 competition as my daily driver, and I bought my red 2018 GT3 PDK. It's the best car I've ever driven around a track. It was beautiful. It was fast. It was easy to drive. It was so fast around the track. It let even someone that had been out of going to the track for a long time go fast with nothing but brake pads and on it. I mean, the car was totally stock except for brake pads, and I was able to do. I did a sub 2-minute lap at Thunderhill East, which felt fast to me, although it was probably still 4 or 5 seconds slower than the car could do. But all things, good things come to an end. I decided to sell the GT3 and stop tracking for a while, and I bought a 718 Spider recently. You can see the reviews of that elsewhere on the channel. It's probably my favorite car that I've owned on a back road. It fixes so many things about the original 2016 Boxster Spider that I had. It looks better. It actually has the more aggressive GT4 wheels. It has the GT3 based front suspension and the less rubber in the rear suspension, more aggressive aero. It's really an attractive looking car. I like this one a lot. And a Mercedes E63S. It's probably the best daily I've driven. It certainly doesn't have the instant response of the electric car. The P100D was still probably faster, 0 to 60, although the E63 is only a few tenths of a second slower. The E63 is faster on the highway than my P100D is, although obviously the new Model S Plaid will fix that. But the E63 makes all sorts of fantastic noises that you're just never going to get out of an electric car. And it's such a sort of old school German luxury machine. Very much enjoy my E63 as well. Well, that catches us up. That's the 81 cars I owned, and hope you enjoyed learning about it.